Tonight, a look at the media, our local role, national reputation, fake news, the challenges of in-depth reporting, and public expectation. It is a discussion you won't want to miss, and MiWeek starts right now.
Did you know Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago? In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. The news is fast and furious this week with the world's journalists focusing on Detroit and the auto show, President Obama's farewell speech, and President-elect Donald Trump's first news conference in months. It's a good time to take a step back and check ourselves. The role of the media has been intensely scrutinized, not only at the national level during the presidential campaign and after, but you can look at local stories now where politicians like the mayor of Warren complain about a rigged media, only looking for sensational stories. So we're going to spend the whole show taking a hard look at the role of the press and why some people just don't trust the media and journalists anymore. And when we say media, who are we really talking about? Also, we'll look at how media outlets can better serve an audience, even in an age of cutbacks. We have a great group of people to discuss this. Some of them are new to MiWeek. Of course, you know our contributors, Stephen Henderson, the editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press, and Nolan Finley, the editorial page editor of the Detroit News. Hey, guys, it's always good to see you. Also joining us is Professor Lee Wilkins from Wayne State University. She is the chair of the communications department and specializes in studying media ethics. Welcome, Lee. Thanks so much for being here. Also here is Ron Fournier. He's a journalist who has spent much of his career covering national politics for the AP, the Atlantic, National Journal, and was just last week named publisher and editor of Crain's Detroit Business. Ron, it's good to see you. Welcome to MiWeek.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and someone we welcome back to Detroit Public Television and MiWeek, Phil Power, who is not only a former newspaper publisher, but is also the founder and the chairman of the Center for Michigan, which publishes Bridge Magazine, a nonprofit, in-depth, bi-weekly news magazine. Hi, Phil. It's good to see you.
Hi, Christy. Good to be here.
All right. So, we've got the right people in place for this. And this is a discussion that I've been wanting to have for quite a long time. And I know we've been working with people's schedules, but we have it on this week where the media is now back in such intense scrutiny. But before we even jump in and talk a little bit about what Donald Trump was saying yesterday in the war of words between now BuzzFeed, CNN, and unsubstantiated reports, he says, I want to define first, when we say media now, who are we really talking about? And since you guys always get the first word, I'm going to jump over here first, and I'm going to start with you, Ron. When we say media, who are we talking about now? 310
million people in this country. Anybody who has access to the internet is now a publisher, a writer, an editor, and that's part of the complication we have right now.
Lee, what do you think?
I think that's who media is, so I'm going to parse it a little bit and say I want to talk a little bit about who journalists are. Journalists are part of those 310 million people who have a loyalty to the public and to the Commonwealth, not to making a profit and not to themselves. That's a different cut.
Agree completely.
Do you think it's a bit of a danger, though, because people aren't differentiating between journalists and media anymore, Nolan?
Well, I mean, how can they? It's like Ron said, anybody who's got a modem and got a computer can get up and get on the web, and there's really no hierarchy of credibility on the web. You Google something, and one of Steve's articles might pop up the same.
Next to Nolan.
Right next to mine. who do you believe? And that really drags down the credible source. But you got Bob, in between the two of us, you got Bob the blogger in his mom's basement, who is right there, and a reader comes to the website and looks and comes to Google or one of the other search engines and has to make a decision: credible source, not credible source.
Yeah, but the web can't be a totally dirty word because all of us are publishing on the web as well. Phil, what do you think about when we say media and journalists and the differentiation between the two now?
I think it's easiest to look at it as media is the platform by which journalism is distributed. And the argument, I think, has less to do with media because there will always be differing and new platforms coming about. The question is journalism respected? How does it work? Is it credible? What is its role in the workings of our society? And how do we deal with the problem of fake news? And I would like to drive a stake into the heart of the phrase fake news.
You want to retire it?
Retire it. How do we maintain an appropriate role for journalists and journalism regardless of the distribution platform?
And here's what's really
it's so fundamental.
That's an important distinction, because as media has adapted, as corporations and governments and bloggers are now able to do what we used to be able to do only ourselves as journalists, now journalists, the people, as you say, who are part of the media, whose job it is to represent the public, we have to adapt, because now there's an onslaught of people who have the tools that used to be only in our germane, who can now lie to us, who can now lie to the public, who can, as Donald Trump did, just say things yesterday that were just flat out wrong. And we have to figure a new way to be able to win back credibility, and also new tools and new ways to call out lies and
to stop
change
ourselves.
and hold people accountable in ways that we haven't been able to do the last
And
few
how do
years.
we do that, Stephen? Let me ask you.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we're going to have to do is, and this is often anathema, I mean, the media are going to have to sort of work together to deal with
That is one
the
thing,
administration of Donald Trump. So yesterday, when we saw him, screaming at this correspondent from CNN, refusing to take a question from probably the largest cable news network,
And calling them out and saying, you're fake news,
right.
you're fake news.
I think that is deserving of a response from the media as a whole, right?
You know what the
We
first
have to be
response
able to
should have been?
say, no way.
Yeah, I agree completely. And the first response should have been, nobody else should have asked a question
That's right.
until
We're done.
CNN got theirs in.
Yeah, everybody should have said
Another-
his turn.
Another quick example, we all complained that Donald Trump didn't release his tax returns, and we wrote editorials and columns, and we did the old things. What if we had kind of gotten together and said, you know what, or at least one network said, you're not going to get on my network anymore. There's not going to be any more reporting on Donald Trump until you release your tax records.
But
That
you know what?
kind of aggressive approach is maybe the kind of thing we need to be looking
But
at
it
now.
gets into the tough competition of, oh gosh, are we all going to stand together on that? Who's that their first news operation that's going to cave on that, and then they can get the exclusive from him or get that kind of information, because it's still that kind of competition.
Well, and it
I
gets
think
into an
hang
area
on
of
one sec.
activism.
Hang on one second. Go ahead.
I would say, if the person is Trump, the answer is anybody but Fox. And as long as we can admit that and work together, I think we would be okay. One of the things, the way that journalists are going to have to adapt is we were all raised to think that journalism is a highly competitive business. In this era, with the web, we are going to have to learn how to become highly cooperative, because that's the only way that we're going to get stories that have some depth and have some meaning to our readers, listeners.
And in ways, yes, activists for the truth, activists for the public.
Yeah, I'm not real comfortable with either of those propositions. I don't know, would you say on the other side, Lee, anybody but MSNBC? I mean, everybody, and when it comes to cable, increasingly they have a point of view, and you can't lump cable in, or a lot of these cable channels, with the rest of the media. And I would really object to us moving as one unit here. I'm not sure that serves the public well, because we have to check our own selves off each other.
I tried to qualify it when I said, in the case of Trump, it's anybody but Fox. There will be other people who will present other cases, but I don't think that moving as one necessarily means that we don't check ourselves and check one another.
What about the concept of moving as one, Phil? And you also brought up the question of how do we gain the trust back of the audience? And is that working more together? And that's Nolan saying, well, wait a minute, I might want to push back against that.
This is not as easy as it was 40 or 50 years ago. Because there are now so many different distribution channels, and those channels are typically associated with a particular point of view rather than an attempt to try to tell it as close as you can to what it is. 50 years ago, when I was a kid growing up, Walter Cronkite would come on, it was a CBS, I think so,
CBS,
and he would end his newscast saying, well, that's the way it was.
Right.
And that provided a substrate of undoubted, unchallenged fact around which we could then erect a civil conversation in this country. We now have, a lot of people say, well, it's post-fact. I think it's probably pre-fact because we are packaging pablum according as our particular audience preferences work, rather than being driven by what's going on, what's real, what's accurate, and how do we say it as clearly and as in a trustworthy way as possible.
Ron?
Yeah, I don't think we're post-fact because there's still facts. We're post-gatekeeper. We're post the era that you were talking about. And this, to me, now is more of a we the people issue. All of us, not just the media. We now, because of the changes in the media, we can wake up every day and spend all day, we can spend our whole lives only reading and listening to news and opinion that reaffirms our biases.
Absolutely.
And that was something that
We have to
President
decide.
Obama actually spoke about in his farewell
Yes,
speech.
and he and his party have taken advantage of that as well. What we have to do as a people is decide that we're going to teach our kids and we're going to educate ourselves to not let ourselves be exploited, not let ourselves be divided, not let ourselves be atomized intellectually, and to seek out opinions that challenge our point of view. That's something all of us have to do, not just in the media. Because the media doesn't have that power that it used to do anymore. This is now a social issue.
Yeah, I mean, but Stephen, but it's so easy to sit in your Facebook feed or your Twitter feed and you have the things that you specifically like in your narrow focus, and you're maybe not exposed to anything else beyond what you like to see that does reaffirm what you're thinking.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've got this tremendous tool that all of us take advantage of, the internet, that at once puts more information out there than ever before, but also allows the user to control the flow of that information. And so, the consumers are not as sophisticated yet with that tool as they might be in 20 or 50 years, as they learn to sort of mix it up and figure out how to get differing points of view into that stream. I don't know that that's our responsibility so much as it is the consumer and how that consumer matures as the internet sort of grows.
Nolan, hang on one second. Nolan, I want you to
Well, I think we have a responsibility ourselves as the press to comport ourselves better and to get back to our sort of core value of absolute objectivity. I don't think we did so well. We served ourselves so well in this last election. There was too many cases of collusion with the campaigns, and there was too many reporters, too many editors who felt part of their mission was to help defeat Trump. And it crept in, I think, into our reporting, into our presentation, and our readers, our viewers picked up on that.
Isn't it possible, even likely, that you're both right?
What do you mean?
Well, we all
The consumer has to
Just
mature.
ask him, Ron.
The consumer no, but it is not mutually exclusive. The consumer has to mature and be more responsibility, and the mainstream media, what's left, has to be more accountable to itself.
Lee, go ahead.
Well,
and
two
then Phil, I'm
things.
coming to you.
One is I don't like calling citizens consumers. We, as journalists, are talking to citizenry. They're not just people who buy stuff. There are other things at issue here.
Right.
So I would like to change that language, even though I understand that we're in a media market and we often talk about people that way. Folks aren't consumers to me, they're citizens. The second one is this is a place where the web has a huge advantage, because when I was first in media business, I had 10, 12 inches to write a story. Now, if I'm on the web, not only can I write that story, but I can attach documents. I can attach what other people have said. My space, if you want to look at it that way, is infinite, and I'm not just stuck with words. I can use images, I can use audio. So that's the place where I think the web has given us a whole bunch of tools. I think we're still fumbling to learn to use them properly, but I think there's a lot of good stuff there.
Phil.
One way to look at this is with social media. Everybody who has a computer and a modem is now a publisher. Very few people are editors.
Or good ones.
Or at least competent editors. All of us supposedly
Why'd you look at me when you said that?
I was gonna say, yeah, I think now.
But that is a huge issue, because I think the question that really lurks at the heart of this discussion is what role are journalists and journalism going to have in the public discourse of our country? Because both political parties and every organization with an axe to grind has figured out how to assault, attack, distort, and control journalists in a way that suits their purposes. Yeah. And unless journalists figure out a way to reestablish the trade as in the interest of the public, we're going to get cut to pieces and sliced and diced day after day.
All right, so address that.
There's a really interesting sort of wrinkle to that comes out of this campaign. In one way, Donald Trump, through his Twitter account, got closer to the people and communicating directly to the people than I think a lot of journalists get through most of their days doing their jobs. And that didn't used to be true. It used to be that the press was part of the vehicle through which the president or somebody running for president dealt with the public. He's gone around us to deal with them directly. And I think that has a lot to do with the appeal to Donald Trump. People feel like he's talking to them when they're reading these sort of
And
outbursts
he's
on
not
Twitter.
being, not being filtered by anyone.
So it's no longer a matter, as Phil said, of manipulating us. He clearly intends to bypass us.
Right. And so then the question is, so how do we reconnect with those same people in a direct way, the way that he has been able to?
All right, so let me ask you that question, and let me tack on something a little extra to that. In the age of where money is shrinking in the news business, okay? So we have this gargantuan task in front of us in terms of reconnecting with people and reestablishing what the job of a journalist is. How do we do this in an age where revenue is maybe not as high, people are not paying for content? You can go online and you can read what you want, with the exception of, the Washington Post. People are starting to buy subscription to New York Times, but you can go on the web at the Detroit News and you can get all that content. And you guys have had cutbacks. It is not, it's not for the faint of heart. How do we do this in this age now? I'm going to start with you, Lee.
Thanks a lot.
We're not going to start with Lee. We're going to go.
No, I think that is the question. So I have a really simplistic answer. What we need to do is do good journalism, a day in, day out. And I think that in the election, there were some examples of news organizations that did precisely that. The New York Times did some fabulous journalism. The Washington Post did some fabulous journalism. There were some local outlets that did fabulous journalism. We need to make that the standard. The second thing we need to do is I think we need to get over the fact that we can't afford to be a reactive profession anymore. Too many of my students, so guys, take this for what it's worth, think that journalism is stenography. That's the thing that journalism can't be anymore, because the web will let you be your own stenographer. It's our job to put facts in context. It's our job to connect the dots for people in sophisticated ways. And we're not going to be able to control what they do with them, but I firmly believe, and there are some academic studies that suggest this, that good journalism over time is profitable. So
I agree with all that, and I would also add in a word that's associated with Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders: disruption. It's why I threw out the example of an embargo on Trump. We got to be thinking of stuff like that. We've really got to change the way we operate. For example, let's look at Donald Trump. Two things that he did, we need to do in a different sense: being more connected to our readers, speaking directly to them ourselves, being more transparent to them, and also look at how he blew up the structures of politics. The old legacy structures of politics, the idea that you had to buy $10 million worth of ads, the idea that you had to go through the media. So the old legacy institutions of politics, he blew away, right? Well, what's the analog to the media? Well, that's where we look at printing presses and huge staffs. And I'm not saying that we have to have smaller staffs and no print, but we do have to really change the infrastructure of journalism so we can get back to what matters. Hard-nosed, watchdog journalism that connects directly with people. I don't know what the answer is, but it looks nothing like what any of us are doing right now.
But in this town, we've had some really good journalism over the last few years.
Incredible journalism, and this year too.
I would push back a little about this idea that problem is content-based. We've had great content, and we still have a tremendous amount of readers. These two newspapers in town, we reached the same number of eyeballs we always did.
Actually,
but
more.
But you have less people to do the job now, Nolan. Would you agree with that?
And that's precisely because our readers are coming to us on a format that we haven't figured out how to monetize. And I mean, this idea that people are leaving the newspapers and leaving the other mainstream outlets because the content is no longer there.
I don't think it's that they're leaving. I think it's
leaving.
They aren't leaving. I mean, and we do have more readers now than either newspaper probably had at its heyday when it was just a print product. At the same time, what Donald Trump shows is that what readers want, what citizens want, is that connection. They want to feel like they matter. They want to feel like their opinions matter, and they want it directly from the people who are making decisions. And that poses a challenge to us because it's not really what we do.
But if they came flocking back to us in even greater numbers, we still wouldn't make money. We still
the money problem would still be there.
The money
But the business
part
problem
of it.
is a structural problem. It's part of what I'm talking about before. We can't just say, oh, it's a business problem and we can't do anything about it. We have to change the way our industry works, not just the way we cover, but how we distribute, and how we operate as a news organization.
And how we
that's how we
engage.
fix the business
I think
problem.
that's a real key word.
That's part of the business problem,
I mean,
don't you think?
how you communicate with readers in a way that makes them feel like they are participating
in your process.
In the process.
That could solve the business problem.
And let me go over to Phil because because what the Center for Michigan backs in Bridge Magazine and the engagement that the center has done in kind of bringing the readers back around, and the content is a little bit different, and it's nonprofit journalism right now. What you're looking at.
It is. I think there are two things that come quickly to mind. The first is the last 20 years have substituted print advertising, which brings newspapers and other print publications dollars, for clicks in social media.
Right.
And in clicks, at the very best, you get pennies. So the economic basis of the business model of journalism has changed utterly. And I know of no one who has figured out a way to deal with that.
Yeah.
At the Center for Michigan, we are trying to figure out a way to develop a business model which allows us to sustain serious journalism by a combination of things. We raise money from foundations. We raise money from wealthy people. We ask our readers to send us a check for $25 and get a tax deduction. We cut syndication deals with organizations like Cranes.
Do events.
We're trying to figure out ways to get income which is associated with journalistic quality and trustworthiness in such a way as to allow us to do our job in the public interest. And this ain't easy.
Phil, is the advertising model dead for
Pretty much dead.
Yeah.
It's pretty much
It won't
dead.
sustain.
Yeah.
It won't sustain newsrooms of the size.
And
that
so
we-
we've trained our web users now to expect everything we do for free. And I think we've got to develop a cable TV style model where people pay for the specific things they want from us.
There's a training, a comfort issue involved. We started asking our readers to send contributions to sustain our journalism 4 years ago. And we got, I don't know, $35,000. Next year, $85,000. We just finished our fall campaign, $120,000. And we have more than 2,000 donors. And their contributions per donor have remained absolutely stable.
Here's the problem.
We
We've
think there are people prepared
if you ask them.
to pay for and read good stuff.
Okay, wrap up, quick point. Go ahead, Ron, and then I
problem
have
is-
one last question for you all.
On the training thing, the problem is Americans have never paid the full price of journalism. They had adjacency, took care of that. Before that, first 80 years of this country, everything was partisan. Everything was MSNBC and Fox.
Historically,
So
yeah.
it's complete retraining.
You know, we could go on for an hour here because I wanted to get into the difference between television and print. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask all of you kind of the same final last question in terms of focusing a little bit on Detroit now and Michigan. What are we going to see now in the next 5 years? What do we need to see out of our publications, out of our local media to further, I guess, Michigan's story or change the coverage that we're doing here in Michigan? I'm going to start with you, Stephen.
I think Lee Wilkins said it earlier. I mean, it's about good, solid journalism and fidelity to those sort of first principles of the idea of an industry that enjoys this enormous constitutional protection for very important reasons to democracy. We have to stay in that lane and rededicate ourselves to that in order to get back to the place that we want to be.
Nolan?
And we have to make sure the scoundrels know we're still watching. I mean, our resources have been cut back. When I ran the Lansing Bureau, I had 13 people up there.
In a Lansing
There's not
Bureau,
13 people in the whole Capitol Press Corps now. And yet there's still corruption up there. There's still things
There are
that are,
stories to be told.
and we come across them. But we need to stretch our resources in the watchdog role.
We got to divide 45 seconds. Lee?
Everything they said And we need to get back to covering government, as boring as it is, and the fact that even though we think people don't always want to read, we need to go there, we need to do that.
Everything you
that,
said,
Ron.
and pull back the lens and remember that we're storytellers. That every day we're telling a chapter in the greatest comeback in the last 100 years in the city of Detroit, or the greatest decline. And either way, it's going to be a model for the rest of the country.
Phil, last word, 15 seconds.
I think we need to establish a connection between what citizens are interested in and want, the kind of journalism we do, and the impact that journalism has on public policy and on people's lives in the concrete, everyday divinity of their existence.
All right, we're going to have you all come back again. Phil Power, Ron Fournier, Lee Wilkins, of course, Nolan and Stephen for being here. Thanks so much. That's going to do it for my week. Thanks for joining us. A couple of things to watch for coming up next week. Governor Snyder will be giving his State of the State address. We will have full coverage of that, plus looking ahead to Inauguration Day for Donald Trump. Make sure you join us back here next Thursday. And as always, you can find us Facebook and Twitter at MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next time.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015? It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's, Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.